Hey guys, and welcome to this next episode of TNCBA's Tips, Tricks, and How-Tos. Kelsey, full moon this week. Heading to Holston this week. They should be on beds, and there may have already been a wave move up to spawn.
Possibly.
But we know we're going to be there at a prime time for fishing for these smallmouth as they spawn on the beds. One of your favorite times, one of my favorite times. So, how are you going to attack this? What are you going to talk about today with approaching the spawn on Holston?
Techniques that I'm going to use to approach this situation right now, right here, right now, is we both know on this lake, this time of year, these fish are very weird about how they go to spawn, whether it be certain sections of the lake will start to fire up. And it's just sporadic how
we've killed ourselves before in a BFL. I'll go out there and I'll swear up and down, there is not a spawn happening, but that section of the lake or that pocket, and there'll be a million boats in there with you. But they are spawning right there, and that's where it's starting. And you better be in on it when it goes. But you can. It's like different parts of the lake are going to kick off first. But it's also, you know, in our heads, you read Bassmaster magazines, you read all these other articles. I'm looking for these nice flat spawning bays. That's not always the case with these smallmouth here on Holston. Now, yes, you can get on some of this river rock stuff that's flatter and you'll find them spawning, but these fish, oftentimes you're finding them spawning on some steeper banks.
I normally look for those 45s, you know, the slower slopes,
but they got some ledges to them and
some
stuff.
ledges. That's key, those ledges, because I mean, you know, these are clear water fish. They're going to be spawning anywhere between 10 to 2 foot of water. I mean, realistically.
And you can find them super shallow, like you just said, and you might pull out there a little bit deeper, and whether they're staging up just a little bit further down the bank or even bedding. And when we talk about fishing for bedding fish here on Holston, we're not sitting here watching these fish, guys.
No.
This is not sight fishing. These fish are just a little bit deep enough in many cases you can't see them, or they blend in so well. They also don't have, it's not like go down south in Florida, or even I've seen them on Hartwell before.
Exactly, yeah.
These big obvious beds.
No.
They're hard to see from that way. And every once in a while I've been able to see a fish that'll run off. And then I've seen them come back to a certain area, but I lose them again real quickly. And
I would like to say that this type of spawn fishing, especially for these smallmouth, it's more like performance surgery. You really have to dissect what you're doing, because I mean, you really can't see those fish a lot of times. So you have to be very precise and know exactly where you cast, watch your cast.
Yeah, and Kelsey's had some really good draws in BFL. To be with some guys that were on top of this spawn and stuff. And when he talks about that surgical precision, your guys knew exactly what the lineup was on those banks.
That, and then what I was going to say is, I mean, if you don't know where these fish are, you need to be casting in increments of just a few, no more than a foot apart.
Yeah, because you can miss a lot.
You can miss a bed.
Or miss 2 or 3 beds. I've been in a couple areas up here on Holston, guys, where in a stretch that's not 10 foot wide, catch 3 or 4 fish in that one little area.
Exactly.
So if you're sitting here you've got the boat on high and you're flying down the bank, and every 30 feet you're making a cast.
You could be missing fish.
And that mess you up on knowing whether or not this bite's even happening.
And going back to what you were saying, I remember one guy specifically, we fished together, and he had went up there and practiced. And he knew exactly where those fish were going to be. He knew what they weighed and everything, because he went up there 2 days before and caught them. Yeah. So those fish, when they lock on, they lock on. Yeah. And he's like, I know I could go up here and catch that fish. And then he said, I could come back 2 hours later and catch that fish again. So if you do lose a fish or you miss a fish, whatever, always come back to it. Yeah. But let's get into the techniques that I'm going to use. So really, the first technique I'm probably going to pick up, if I'm not certain about that worm bite, is normally right before the spawn gets kicked on. I'm going to be throwing a single swim bait. This is just a 4-inch. This is a Bass Pro Shop Sexy Shad colored. It's kind of like a Kitex swim bait. Just a paddle tail. I'm going to throw that on a single hook. That swim bait bite gets really good around this time of year. They're feeding up. They're getting ready before they go onto the beds. And a lot of times they're going to be really prevalent on biting that swim bait. And a lot of times is right before they go get locked on the beds. you'll have a really good swim bait bite, and then all of a sudden you'll notice they'll just start nipping at it. And that's when you know. And when they start bumping it, doing that, throw your worm in there.
Pick that worm up, yep.
Because that normally means you just went across right across their bed, and they're sitting there trying to protect it.
Yep.
And like I said, whenever that happens, turn around, pick up that worm, start throwing that, because that means they are locked on.
Yeah, because you're looking for those telltale signs, guys, and it's hard to slow yourself down and go as surgically as what Kelsey was talking about with the worm bite before you know they're there.
Mm-hmm.
And so you are going to pick up some of these baits, these swim baits and stuff, and cover some water, and then those telltale signs, when they start popping up, then you go to that surgically just slowing down. And when he talks about the swim bait, one thing I'll say is kind of there towards the end of March, which we're already past now when you're watching this video, is they kind of set up out in the middle of those pockets around bait. Then they'll slide up over to the bank, and I'm going to get fairly close to paralleling the banks with these swim baits at this point. So I'm working it through that zone,
keeping it
of
in,
that 3 to 10 foot range or 3 to 15 foot range. Because even these fish, like I said, they'll stage up just a little bit deeper on that break, on that 45-degree bank, or a little bit further out on some of these river rock flats, or maybe there's a cluster of rocks or something. So pick up that swim bait, get you some bites. And as we're coming into this full moon, though, this week, and getting ready to go out for the tournament on Holston Saturday, you're going to want to make sure you're thinking spawn, because those fish should be pushing up. Barring a major cold front, barring some crazy weather, those fish are going to be moving up. So we're past the swim bait.
Well, I was going to say, and trust me about this, when they're on that swim bait bite, there's going to be no mistake. They're swallowing that swim bait.
Yes.
I mean, they're eating it.
Yeah.
So if you're just getting nips, they're more than likely you're in an area where those fish are locked on. Just want to.
So once they go on beds, Kelsey, we're now starting to think about really surgical precision going down the bank, of paying attention to the rock, looking for little cracks that run down, because you know there's going to be a ledge or something at the base of them, or it's just some sort of little indentation that might be a little bit different.
Rock.
Slate rock.
Those are the kind of banks I'm going to focus on. But once we get past that swim bait and start talking about the next bait that I'm going to throw, it is going to be a little 4-inch green pumpkin worm. And I mean, there's nothing special about it. I just throw it Texas rigged with a 1/8 ounce tungsten sinker and a 2-aught worm hook. So I mean, nothing spectacular about it, but I'm telling you, this is one of those baits that just drives those fish wild, and they can't stand it being on those beds. And when I'm throwing this thing, I'm working it really slow. I am. I'm working it. I'm just slowly dragging it down those areas, really working those spots. Because I mean, I've had a lot of success with it in certain areas. I'll be honest with you. In certain areas, I've had a lot of good success with it.
And there's been smaller areas.
Yes, but the thing is working it slow and giving those fish time, because when they grab it, they're going to take off. It's really fun how they do it, because they're going to grab it and they're going to run as fast as they can to get it off of their bed. And a lot of times you might miss them.
Right.
And don't be afraid to keep throwing back in that spot, because if you go back a couple years ago when we fished a Connect Scale tournament out there, you'll see in that video of me working on a spot. I mean, it's kind of condensed. We cut the video back a little bit, but I spent probably 15-20 minutes on a fish that I'd missed. And I just kept on throwing back in there. And then finally, about 15-20 minutes later, it grabbed it. And I missed it a couple times in between there. But it grabbed it. I got it. 4-pound smallmouth. I mean,
and that's the thing when Kelsey talks about paying attention to your cast. As you make a cast and you're working it down the bank there, you need to know, because if that fish picks it up, spits it before you're able to set the hook into them, you need to get that cast right back in that same spot. And where we're not looking at these fish, you're more kind of feeling your way down the bank. You've got to move it slow, because too much of a hop will get you over the bed. It might move through the bed too fast. But pay attention to that lineup as you make that cast.
When I'm throwing that bait out there, I'm throwing it out there, and I'll keep my slack up, and I'll just slowly turn my body or pull the rod back. I don't really like to pull it back. I like to keep it low and just drag it across the bottom, so I'm keeping that contact. That's how I like to do it. More like you would throw like a Carolina rig or something like that. Slow, throw it out there and drag it. that's kind of how I'm working this bait this time. I mean, during this situation.
So now so we talked about the fact that we're switching over to a green pumpkin worm. What are you throwing as far as hook size, weight size, and then get into the line and the rod that you're throwing?
So I'm throwing it on a 1/8 ounce tungsten bullet weight. I'm throwing it Texas rigged. Nothing spectacular. That's how I like to throw it. And I'm throwing a 2/0 Trocar, just regular worm hook.
Okay.
That's my preferred hook of choice, and normally don't have any problems with them straightening them out. I mean, it is a 2/0. It's a little bit lighter wire hook, but still don't have a problem with it. And then when we get into our line size, I always throw 10 on my on most of my spinning gear, but I still throw a 10. It's strong enough, but it's translucent enough that it's not going to affect the fish seeing it. And then I'm throwing it on a 7-foot medium heavy action worm rod.
Okay.
Now I do like that medium heavy because these fish are kind of crazy.
Well, they're crazy and they're stout.
I mean, they're stout. It's giving me that little bit of leverage because, I mean, if you're working with a flimsy rod with these fish, they're coming off mean.
They are coming off mean, but the other thing I'll say to add to that is I've had several fish here where they clamp down so hard on the weight.
Exactly.
That if you, with that little bit stiffer rod, you're going to at least get that weight through their mouth and that hook into them, because we've fought them all the way to the boat before, and they come off,
open their mouth.
And then you look, and the hook's never penetrated the worm.
It's never. Yeah, I've had that happen several times in the past few years, especially around this time. Those smallmouth have really strong jaws, and they're going to clamp down.
So a little bit stiffer rod in this case, a medium heavy. Still dealing with maybe a fast tip, not necessarily an extra fast.
I would say a fast. It's not. Yeah, it comes down a good ways before you're getting into the backbone of that rod.
Okay, and then a reel. When it comes to spinning reels,
this one's it's actually a higher speed reel for a spinning reel. It's a 6.2
But you want to be able to pick up that line
exactly because
if they pick it up and run with it.
Because these fish are going crazy. I mean, I'm not kidding. I can't tell you how many times I've went to set the hook. And going back to that video, I remember watching. I mean, I've casted 20 foot up this way, set the hook, and start to reel, and that fish is already jumping, and it's already halfway back to the boat.
Right.
I mean, they just this time of year, you got to think about this. You're going to have to learn how to play these fish because they go nuts. You want to have your drag set right, not too heavy, not too light, because.
So definitely thinking
they're going nuts
about picking up that line and keeping up with them. So a high speed spinning reel, having 8-10 pound test line. If you like braid as a main line, and then having a fluoro leader, having maybe a medium heavy versus the medium action rod just for a little bit extra oomph in that hook set. 2/0 hook, as he said, an 1/8 ounce bullet sinker with that green pumpkin worm. Now, not saying that's the only way. I mean, drop shots will catch them this time of year. The Ned rig will catch them this time of year.
Wacky rigs, that's another.
Wacky rig will catch them this time of year. So there's many different ways for you to approach this and catch these fish that are on the beds. You need to figure out what they're looking for. And it may be that one of those little changes is what helps you get bit. But I think our biggest thing, Kelsey, that we would stress to everybody is as you get onto that worm bite is slowing down and really picking through an area.
Be very methodical about your cast. And just take your time.
And don't think twice about, as you go down that bank, turning right around and coming right back up that bank, because there may have been some more move up.
And yeah, that's another thing I was going to say. If you caught a fish, you remember every cast. That is one thing I will not stress enough. Remember every cast you make. Watch where it hits the water, because every time you get bit, there is a bed there. If you catch a fish off that bed, you come back an hour to 30 minutes later, there's going to be another fish on that bed.
Moving into that area.
I've done it so many times.
You may have caught the male.
Yeah, you may have caught the male. You may catch the female. I mean,
or new fish might move in on it.
When we fished that Connect scale a couple years ago, I know I caught a couple of those fish 2 and 3 times because it was a catch and release tournament.
Yeah,
I would let those fish go, and they were the same weight, same spot.
And that's the one unique thing about this time of year is the fact most time if you go out and you hook that fish, you play them to the boat and lose them, you might as well go on. They're not going to bite again. But that's not the case this time of year. So let's talk about thoughts about the spawn on locations of the lake. Again, remember that we talked about this several times, those northern pockets that are facing the south, they're going to warm up first. Some of those areas are going to be the first places to go. Be very thoughtful about wind direction. Okay, you want to be thinking about where the wind's going to be blowing in maybe too hard, or maybe there's too much wind coming from that direction on just that specific day, and it's going to make it hard for you to fish for those bedding fish. That is one thing that you always need to be taking into account, is when you look at the Weather Channel and then you look at your map, thinking about, okay, here's the pockets I'm looking at, fishing in, but that wind's going to be blowing right in on those. I might not be able to fish that worm as effectively. I may have to go up a size in weights and stuff.
That was one thing I was going to say, is when you get into those windier conditions, you can always step up 3/16, step it up a little bit. I've been out there, I've done it. And it works.
As we talked about as far as size, I know guys that they hate to go fish for them spawning, but they love to fish for them coming and going. So they'll focus on these secondary points. They'll focus on clumps of rock, river rock and stuff that are just off the bank, and they're looking for, and the tube is another great player there.
Another key note, that tube right there is another good one.
It's a great alternate to that.
Yes,
to that green pumpkin
definitely.
worm.
And I mean, I just remember from one of the BFLs, the first one we ever fished out on Holston tournament. I fished, guy I was fishing with, we were fishing mostly for post spawn and pre spawners, and they were on these points, and I probably caught 40 to 50 fish that day.
Yeah.
Ended up finishing 4th out of 100,
however many we had in that
boats or something like that. And I mean, every fish I caught, they absolutely swallowed that tube. So I mean, that's another thing. Look for because they're always in a transition period.
Oh yeah, this time of year, there's fish in every phase. So, you don't have to get locked in on one thing. You may be working through an area where you're catching them spawn, and it leads out to a nice little secondary point there. Fish that. Make sure you work it. I know in some other previous tournaments that we've been in, or that I've read about from the past, like those fish weren't right on top of those points. They were sitting kind of off on the side in about 15-foot water, a little bit deeper and stuff. So these secondary points, slate, river rock, as you move back in on these little bit steeper banks, they will spawn on those as well. Or you can find those river rock flat areas, or maybe it's a do-nothing bank that has some river rock that pops up on it. The biggest thing is, if you can get some bites, slow down in that area. Don't rush through it. But this is definitely one of the tournaments that I'm looking forward to. I know you're looking forward to it, Kelsey. Yeah. You love this time of year and this way of fishing. Guys, get out there, a swim bait in hand, a worm on the deck, those two baits, searching, find them, slow down, and crush them, guys. This is just a great time to be out there, and this worm bite will continue throughout April and into May, as long as this spawn is going on. Like I said, you know that you're going to have some major waves come up with these major moon phases, and there being a full moon this week, there should be a major move up, and it's very, very key to not move too fast and to take your time and a lot of feel. Those fish are going to move with this bait quick, be ready in an instant to set that hook and be taking up some line. Kelsey, any other little tips that you want to give before we kind of sign off here on this episode of Tips, Tricks, and How-Tos?
Just watch that line.
Watch that line,
watch
guys.
That line.
Having a visual on that line. Do not take your eyes off of it. Keep an eye on the line. Pay attention to where your cast was. And I hope you all go out and smash your PB when it comes to your smallmouth this year. I hope you've enjoyed this Tips, Tricks, and How-Tos. Hop out on Holston and enjoy the spawn, guys.